My sister lived rent-free in my house for 6 years with her kids, but when she called the police and kicked my wife out of my own home over a garden, I gave her 60 days to leave, and my family calls me a monster. I'm 32 years old, work at a warehouse doing night shifts, and I need to tell this story because I've been losing sleep for weeks, thinking about whether I did the right thing or if I'm the worst person in the world. What happened a few months ago basically destroyed my relationship with my younger sister and split my family into two camps. And honestly, I still don't know if I made the right decision, but I guess I need to get this all off my chest because it's driving me crazy. My sister Tanya was always the baby of the family, you know, the spoiled one. And when our parents died in a car accident like 13 years ago, I was 19 and she was barely 16, and I basically became her legal guardian because we didn't have any other family nearby. It was tough, I'm not gonna lie, but I did what I could. Worked whatever jobs I could find to pay rent for a small apartment and make sure she finished school. Things got complicated when Tanya was 19 and came to tell me she was pregnant. The guy who got her pregnant disappeared as soon as he found out. Classic, and she was terrified, crying in my living room telling me she didn't know what to do. I had just bought my house, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath place, nothing fancy, but it was mine, and I told her not to worry, that she could stay with me until she had the baby and got on her feet. I thought it would be like 6 months, maybe a year tops, just enough time for her to find a job and save up money for her own place. I never, and when I say never, I mean never, thought she'd stay for 6 full years. I didn't charge her rent because, she was my sister and she was going through a tough time, plus, I was making enough to cover the house expenses and I thought it would be temporary. You know what I mean? She had Caleb when she was 20, a beautiful baby, and I fell in love with that kid from the first moment. He was like my nephew, but also kind of like my son, because we lived together and I helped with everything. The first 2 years were okay, I guess. She worked part-time when she could, and I'd watch Caleb when I had my days off. But then Tanya met another guy, got pregnant again, and that guy also disappeared when Dylan was like 6 months old. By that point, she'd been living with me for 3 years, and I was starting to feel like this wasn't as temporary as we'd planned. But how do you tell your single sister with 2 small kids to leave? I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. So I kept letting her stay without charging her anything. I think that was my first mistake, not setting clear boundaries from the beginning. But in my defense, I was young and stupid and thought I was doing the right thing for my family. Like, 4 years ago, I met Emma at work. She was the new shift coordinator, and we became friends almost immediately. Emma is amazing. Like, she's one of those people who lights up any room she's in, always positive and full of energy. And we started seeing each other outside of work, going out to dinner and movies, stuff like that. When our relationship got serious and I told her about my situation at home, about Tanya and the kids living with me, she said it was no problem, that she understood I wanted to help my family. We got married like a year and a half ago, a small, simple wedding, and Emma officially moved into the house exactly a year ago. That's when the real problem started, because we basically had 2 women trying to be the lady of the same house, and Tanya was not happy with the situation at all. From the beginning there was tension, little things like Emma wanting to reorganize the kitchen or change the living room curtains. And Tanya kind of felt displaced, which I understand to a certain extent because it had been her home for 5 years at that point. But at the same time, damn, it was my house. I was the one paying the mortgage, the utilities, the food, everything, and Tanya never contributed a single cent in 6 full years. Emma tried to be patient and kind. She really tried. But Tanya treated her like an intruder, making passive-aggressive comments about how things were better before, or how Emma didn't understand how our family worked. I was in the middle trying to keep the peace, constantly putting out fires, and it was exhausting. Like I'd come home from work and just want to sleep, but I had to deal with their fights about who left the dirty dishes or who used the last clean towel. The situation exploded like 3 months ago when Emma decided she wanted to do a gardening project in the front of the house. She'd always been super passionate about plants and landscaping. It was like her hobby, and she wanted to turn our front yard into something nice with flowers and shrubs and maybe some vegetables. I told her it sounded great, that she should do whatever she wanted. It was her house too, after all. Emma hired some contractors, spent like $2,000 of her own money that she'd been saving, and scheduled them. to come on a Tuesday when she had off. Here's the thing. Emma didn't tell Tanya about the project, and looking back, she probably should have. But honestly, Emma didn't feel like she needed Tanya's permission to do something in her own house. Which makes sense, right? That Tuesday I was at work, night shift as always, and Emma was home supervising the contractors who had started tearing up the old grass and preparing the ground. Tanya was apparently inside with the kids. Caleb was like 6 and Dylan like 4 at that point, and the kids were watching through the window, seeing the machines and all the commotion. Suddenly, Tanya runs out of the house screaming, literally screaming like crazy according to what Emma told me later, telling the contractors to stop immediately, that they didn't have permission to be there, that this was the space where her kids played. Emma tried to explain that it was a project she had planned, that the kids would still have the backyard to play in, but Tanya didn't want to hear any of it. Kept yelling that Emma couldn't make decisions like this without consulting her, that she and the kids had lived there much longer than Emma. The contractors were super uncomfortable, obviously, didn't know what to do, and Emma told them to keep working because she had every right to make improvements to her own house. Tanya went even more crazy, started saying she was going to call the police, that this was destruction of property, and Emma said something like, "Seriously? You're going to call the police to your brother's house where you've been living for free for 6 years?" That was like throwing gasoline on the fire. Tanya ran inside the house and apparently called her neighbor Brenda, a lady who's also a single mom and who had become friends with Tanya during these years. Brenda came running over and also started yelling at Emma and the contractors, saying what they were doing was illegal, that you can't do construction work without notifying all the residents of the property. And here comes the worst part. Brenda called the police saying there was unauthorized work on a property where there was a dispute between residents. The cops arrived like 20 minutes later, and when Emma explained the situation, that it was her house and her husband was the owner, and she had every right to do the garden, one of the officers said that technically there was a complicated domestic situation and that maybe it would be better if Emma left the house for that night so things could calm down. Emma couldn't believe it. She was crying, telling them it was her house, but the cops basically told her she could leave voluntarily or things could get more complicated. So Emma had to pack a bag and went to a hotel. The contractors obviously left too, leaving the yard a complete mess with dirt and holes everywhere. I got home like at 6 inches the morning the next day, after my night shift, and found the yard destroyed and Tanya in the living room like nothing had happened, making breakfast for the kids. I asked her what the hell had happened, and she started telling me her version, that Emma had brought strange people without warning her, that the kids were scared by the machines, that Emma had insulted her in front of everyone. I called Emma, and she told me the full version from the hotel where she'd slept, and honestly, I got furious, like a fury I'd never felt before. I told Tanya we needed to talk outside. The kids didn't need to hear this, and we went out on the porch. I said, "Tanya, did you seriously kick my wife out of my house? The house where you've been living free for 6 years?" She started saying that Emma had no right to make changes without consulting her, that this was her house too, that the kids had grown up there. I told her no, that this wasn't her house, that it was my house where I had let her stay temporarily, and it had turned into 6 years of her living rent-free. Tanya started crying, saying, "How could I say that to her, that we were family, that she didn't have anyone else?" I told her yes, we were family, and that's why I'd helped her all these years, but that she'd crossed a line, that she'd made the police kick Emma out of her own house. Then Tanya told me something that left me frozen. She said she had tenant rights, that after living in a place for more than 6 months or something like that, you can't be evicted without a legal process, that she'd looked up information online and knew her rights. I couldn't believe it, my own sister threatening me with tenant laws after everything I'd done for her. I told her okay, if that's how she wanted to play this, fine, that she had 60 days to find another place and move out. Tanya said she didn't have money to move, that she couldn't afford an apartment, that I was being cruel to her and her kids. I told her she'd had 6 years to save money, that if she'd been paying even something for rent all this time, she'd have enough for a move. But that, she'd preferred to live completely free. The kids were watching through the window and I felt terrible, like these kids weren't at fault for anything. Caleb and Dylan are good boys, and I love them, but I couldn't keep going like this. I went inside the house, grabbed my keys, and left to find Emma at the hotel. She was devastated. feeling like a stranger in her own life, wondering if she'd done something wrong, and I had to assure her that no, she'd done absolutely nothing wrong. I spent the next few days researching because honestly I didn't know if Tanya was right about tenant rights. I consulted with a lawyer who cost me like $500 just for the consultation, and he confirmed that yes, technically Tanya had rights because she'd established residency there, but that I could legally ask her to leave with proper notice, which in our state was 60 days. The lawyer told me I had to give her written notice, formal notice, and that if she didn't leave after the 60 days, you could start an official eviction process through the courts. I couldn't believe I had to formally evict my own sister. Like, it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but that was my reality. I went back home with Emma and gave Tanya the written notice. She read it and threw it in the trash, literally, saying this was stupid, that she wasn't leaving. I told her she had two options: leave voluntarily in 60 days with my help, or wait to be evicted legally through the courts, which would go on her record and make it almost impossible for her to rent a place afterwards. Tanya said I was being a monster, that I was choosing a woman over my own blood. I told her I wasn't choosing anyone over anyone, that Emma was my wife and we had the right to live in our own house without constant drama, that I'd helped Tanya for 6 full years, but she'd abused my generosity. I also went to talk to the neighbor Brenda, the one who'd called the police. I told her I'd appreciate if she stayed out of my family's business, that if Tanya needed help it was fine for them to be friends, but she had no right to call the police to my property. Brenda told me she'd done the right thing, that someone had to defend Tanya because I clearly wasn't doing it. I told her Brenda had no idea what she was talking about, that she didn't know Tanya had lived free for 6 years, that she didn't know the whole story. She said she didn't care. That single mom to single mom, they supported each other. Honestly, I didn't have energy to argue with her. I just told her if she called the police to my house again without a legitimate reason, she was going to have problems with me. The following weeks were the worst of my life. Tanya practically stopped talking to me, only communicated with me through short, cold text messages, and when I'd come home from work, she'd lock herself in her room with the kids. Emma and I were basically living, walking on eggshells in our own house, trying not to make noise, avoiding the kitchen if Tanya was there. It was ridiculous and draining. Tanya started telling all the extended family her version of the story. Cousins we hadn't seen in years were suddenly calling me, saying I was a bastard. How could I kick out my sister and her kids onto the street? I tried to explain the full context, but it was like talking to a wall. They only heard that I was evicting a single mother with 2 small children, and automatically I was the villain. Like 3 weeks into the 60-day notice, Tanya still hadn't started looking for an apartment or anything, just stayed in the house complaining to her friends on the phone about how terrible I was. I was starting to worry that I really was going to have to go to court to evict her, which was going to cost more money and more time. I told her I'd help with moving costs, that I'd give her like $1,000 for an apartment deposit, that I'd even help her look for places that would accept her situation. She said she didn't want my dirty money, that if I was going to kick her out to just do it but not pretend to be the hero offering help. I also called social services, not to report her or anything like that, but to ask what resources were available for single mothers who needed housing. They gave me information about rent assistance programs, about housing authority that had a waiting list but she could apply, about temporary shelters if it came to the extreme case. I passed all this information to Tanya, and she threw it away without even looking at it, saying she didn't need charity from the government. But clearly she had no problem with my private charity for 6 years. You know what I mean? The hypocrisy was killing me. Getting to day 50 of the 60-day notice, Tanya finally started packing. Like, you could see she was dragging her feet as much as possible, but that she was realizing this was going to happen whether she wanted it to or not. She found a 2-bedroom apartment like 20 minutes away. It wasn't luxurious, but it was decent. And I think her friend Brenda was going to be her roommate or something to split the rent. I didn't ask many details because honestly, every conversation with Tanya at that point was torturous. The kids were confused, especially Caleb, who was old enough to understand something bad was happening but not exactly what or why. It broke my heart every time he asked me if he could still come visit me after they moved. Day 60 arrived, and Tanya actually moved out. I helped load the boxes into the truck she'd rented, working in complete silence because she wouldn't speak to me. Emma stayed inside, didn't want to cause more drama, and I just loaded box after box thinking about how the hell we'd gotten to this point. When we finished and Tanya was about to leave with the kids in the car, Caleb rolled down the window and said, "Bye, Uncle Jason. I'm going to miss you." And I had to make a superhuman effort not to cry right there. I told him that he and Dylan would always be welcome to visit me whenever they wanted, that they could call me for whatever they needed, but Tanya hit the gas and left before I could finish talking. It's been like 2 months since she left. The house feels empty in a weird way, you know? Like for 6 years there was always noise from kids, there was always someone else there, and now it's just Emma and me. Emma finally finished her gardening project and it turned out beautiful. We have tomatoes and herbs and flowers everywhere, but every time I see her working out there, I can't help feeling this weight in my chest. Tanya hasn't contacted me even once. Not even to tell me they arrived okay, or to give me her complete new address. All I know is because my aunt tells me gossip she hears. That Tanya's fine. That the kids started at their new school. That Brenda is indeed her roommate. The family is still divided. Some cousins and uncles think I did the right thing after I explained the whole context of the 6 years and the incident with the police. Others still believe I should have found another solution. That family is family no matter what. Emma is happier now, obviously. She can live in her own house without walking on eggshells. But she knows I feel guilty and asks me constantly if I'm okay. I tell her yes, but honestly, I'm not sure. I miss the kids horribly. Caleb and Dylan grew up with me. I was there for their first words, their first steps, their birthdays, everything. And now it's like they've disappeared from my life. Sometimes I wonder if I was too hard, if I should have tried to mediate more between Emma and Tanya, if I should have established clearer boundaries from year one so we never would have gotten to this point. Other times, I get furious all over again and think that Tanya had 6 full years to get on her feet. 6 years of living free without worrying about rent or utilities, and instead of using that time wisely, she wasted it and then had the nerve to threaten me with tenant laws. I don't know. It's complicated. I guess that's what happens when you mix family and money and housing. Everything becomes a mess. Last week, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Turned out to be from Caleb using Brenda's phone. He asked me if I could come visit him someday, that he missed playing video games with me. I responded that of course, that when his mom gave me permission, I'd gladly go. I never got a response, so I assumed Tanya took the phone away or something. That hurt more than everything else. I think, knowing the kids miss me, but not being able to see them because their mom is mad at me. And that's where I am now. In this house that's finally just mine and Emma's, but feeling empty and guilty and angry and sad all at the same time. I don't know if Tanya is ever going to talk to me again. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure if I want her to.